Hello and welcome to GreenFleet Talks. My name's Kate Armitage and I'm your host for our discussion today. And I'm delighted to be joined by Naomi Nye, who is Head of Sales at Drax. Morning, Naomi.
Good morning, Kate. It's so lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
And it's a pleasure to speak to you as well. Now, Naomi, you know a great deal about electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and you've been in the industry for a long time. But can you tell us a little bit more about Drax and the service that they're offering?
Drax are a global energy company. So in the UK, we're part of the national critical infrastructure, and we supply around 9% of renewable power to the UK. So we have a commercial arm of that. And in that commercial space, we supply customers with renewable power. We support them on their decarbonisation journey, looking at scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. Obviously, vehicles and electrification of vehicles are a huge part of that. So we have our Drax electric vehicles, which supports our customers in that electrification journey and really understanding what they're trying to achieve, how they're trying to achieve it, and then support them with an end-to-end solution.
Oh, okay, Naomi, that's really helpful. And it's really good to understand, you know, Drax is, like you say, a global organization, but you really understand renewable energy and the importance of getting to net zero.
Absolutely. We've got the largest decarbonisation project currently happening in the UK. So that's happening at our power station with carbon capture storage. Really, really exciting stuff. And really, when we're looking at it from an electrification perspective, I mean, it's really about the energy, electric vehicles, electric charging. It's a conduit of that energy. How can we monitor, manage, use that as effectively as possible? And how can we optimize that for customers as well? So there's a number of different things that we can offer our customers and support them on that journey.
Great. And I do think there's a much better understanding when I talk to fleets now about this synergy with renewable energy and this, you know, potentially generating their own energy and storage. It's such an important part of the puzzle that we can't afford to overlook.
Absolutely. It's about bringing it all together, I think.
Yeah,
it's about looking at it from that holistic approach and how do we bring it together and make it work successfully. And I think in the future, as we move forward, that's going to become more and more prevalent.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, now on the more recent side, Drax, of course, took part in the recent EV A to Z rally.
We did.
With GreenFleet. Tell us a little bit about the rally, why you were doing it, and your key takeaways from that.
Oh, the rally was fantastic. So personally, I had some reasons for wanting to do it myself. Obviously, dealing with customers on a day-to-day basis, really understanding their challenges, particularly when we're looking at fleets and public infrastructure and what that looks like. So for me, being out on the road, only having the opportunity to use that public infrastructure and to do the amount of miles that we did throughout the week was an incredible opportunity to really kind of see how that was working, you know, some of the benefits, some of the disadvantages, you know, the challenges that customers were facing. So that was a huge part of it. And really kind of understanding what these vehicles are doing, you know, how they're actually moving around. The amount of different vehicles we had on the rally were incredible.
Yeah.
And seeing, you know, how they were able to cope with those conditions. It was really putting them to the test, really understanding in that real life environment, you know, that the infrastructure is there, that it does work. You know, there's a bit of planning involved, but you know, some of the infrastructure was in, you know, the strangest of locations. But it was incredible how we managed to navigate around. I actually felt a bit spoiled because, you know, I was in a standard kind of fleet car. But the idea was that, you know, from a fleet basis, using fleet vehicles as fully electric, you can do the mileage per day. You can get around the locations. The infrastructure is there and it can be used. And yeah, it was just an amazing experience.
Yeah, great. I'm really pleased to hear it. And your point about the diversity of the vehicles taking part is so important because,
Absolutely.
as you say, the passenger vehicles now, if you're looking at the high end of the range, you could drive all day and not need to recharge at all. But that's not the case for vans and larger vehicles and some of the niche vehicles. So the reality of what fleets are facing is very different sometimes.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about 2030, or is it 2035, or is it 2030? As we're speaking now, we've got verbal acknowledgement from DfT that they're planning to bring the 2030 deadline back in as part of the Labour pledge for cars, but there is still uncertainty around that. What kind of effect is this uncertainty having on business plans, and how much disruption do you think it's causing?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, I think it's a great move. I think it's really positive. I think it was disappointing when it was pushed back those 5 years. And I think, that messaging that's going out to fleet managers in particular, it needs to be clarified. It needs to be very clear, what we're looking to do. I think fleets generally work on kind of 3 to 5 year cycles for their replacement vehicles. So, really have an understanding of how that's going to fit in with their business plans, how it's going to fit in with their finances, really understanding what they're looking at and what they need to do. So I think that clarification, I think is absolutely key. I think at the moment, I think it's a really good time to be thinking about electrifying. The conversations that we've had with customers, there have been a number of companies that have really sort of dipped their toe in the water, maybe putting a little bit of infrastructure, seeing how things go, not really sure what they're looking to do, how they're looking to do it, what those timelines look like. So that clarity there, I think, will help them make some of those decisions and almost kind of push them to action a little bit more. B, I think now's a really good time to kind of be looking at electrifying anyway, either or, whether it's 2030 or 2035, because there is so much support out there still with government grants, infrastructure grants, workplace charging grants that can really help support that and help support that financial burden, if you like, of having to look at the electrification piece. So I just think it's absolutely key.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, and we're going to go, unfortunately, I think even if we get, an actual confirmation of the 2030 for cars being reinstated, that then means that all the work on the ZEV mandate has got to be unpicked, because that only specifies 80% by 2030 for cars. And as we both know, the clarity around vans is pretty poor anyway. So some challenging times, I think, but you're absolutely right. Actually, don't wait to be told to do it. Now's a really good time to do it anyway, which kind of leads me on to those companies that still have not begun to implement any form of electrification. What advice have you got for those companies in getting started, and the main points to consider?
Yeah, so I think really it's around operational requirements, first and foremost, and it's around funding and how those two are going to come together and how they're going to meet. I think if companies can bring in specialist support, the earlier they can bring them in to really look at that data, really have an understanding. It's all about, what does the business need to achieve? What are you trying to achieve from your fleet, from your electrification piece? And then the puzzle pieces kind of fill in behind it. So I think a lot of companies don't really know where to start. They're not really sure, who it sits with within the business. Does it sit with procurement? Does it sit with the energy manager? Does it sit with the fleet manager to look at the EV infrastructure piece? And I think it has to come across a number of different stakeholders. So I think having that specialist support where somebody can come in and really understand those different needs, requirements, really be able to bring that together, look at data, have an understanding of what these vehicles are doing, how are they moving, are they moving site to site, where are their dwell points, what are their dwell times? That really then kind of leads into that, what do you then need to support that business model? And that's really the start, I think, of building out your electrification plans. So if you're looking at, particularly on a site-by-site basis, having an understanding of those operational requirements first and foremost, looking at the data, building then a plan and a design behind that that's going to really work for you, but that's also going to be flexible, going to be future-proof, really able to think about a slightly longer term rather than a short term, 12, 24, 36 months. You know, you want to be looking at really a minimum of kind of 5 years for your infrastructure. Technology is changing very fast. So what kind of technology do I need to put in there? And then from there, you can then look at the financials behind it and build out a plan. There are ways of kind of doing that, whether that's doing the electrification piece in phases, looking at that low-hanging fruit and picking off, you know, where are the sites that you could pick up quickly? How can you get that infrastructure in the ground? Is there a phased approach that you can do across different budgets, or looking at financial options for leasing, look at grant funding, you know, bring all these things into play so you can really build out a plan. And I think the more time that you take at that first point, the more likely you are to get it right and end up with a really good EV strategy. Over the years, I've seen so many people, you know, make some really expensive mistakes. So really having a look at that data and trying to get it right from day one and build it out, I think is absolutely key.
Absolutely great advice, Naomi. And of course, you mentioned at the very beginning about the number of different stakeholders involved in this from a fleet perspective. And I've spoken to some very frustrated people in the past who have struggled to get that engagement internally and the support internally for this. But if you have got that plan, if you've got that data, if you know what the financials look like, getting that buy-in is going to be so much easier as well.
Yeah, really is.
Now, you mentioned low-hanging fruit. It's one of my favorite expressions, because actually for companies that are struggling to know where to begin, there is always low-hanging fruit, you know, and why not go for that? There's no crime in that at all. But we've been at this now for over 10 years. There are many, many fleets who have done the low-hanging fruit, and who are now having to recircle and look at, okay, this went on the too difficult pile, but now we need to start tackling that. And more often than not, it's more likely to be vans or even larger vehicles, so 4.25 tons and above. What do you see as the existing barriers for those segments, and how do you think that's going to kind of play out in the next few years?
So I think there are almost two sides of this. I think traditionally over the last few years, we've seen fewer choice when it's come to those commercial vehicles, which has also put them on the back burner a bit. You know, the vehicles haven't been out there to meet the business demands that are required. I was at the commercial vehicle show earlier this year, and you can really see how in the last couple of years that's changed and developed. There are so many different options out there now, and that is continuing to grow. So that's one big tick in the box, that, you know, we're starting to see more choice and more availability. The second part of this, I think, is really around cost. Again, costs can be more prohibitive. Obviously, those larger vehicles have a much bigger capex when we're looking at the electric vehicles as opposed to the full ICE vehicle versions. So I think that can be a little bit of a barrier. And also the practicality of the infrastructure here becomes more difficult, because the bigger the vehicle, the more space required, the higher power that's often required in terms of charging. So there's a number of different things. And again, that takes the cost up, right? So there's a number of different things that we have to think about and that we have to pull into play. And when we're looking at site designs, depots, you know, these kind of areas where these commercial vehicles call home, if we're trying to charge there, we often don't have the capacity, the infrastructure or the space required to put the infrastructure in. So it's really kind of working with sites, depots, you know, fleet managers on an individual basis to again understand what they're trying to do and what they're trying to achieve and make that happen, but also have to think about, you know, maybe pulling in, thinking about D&O upgrades, thinking about, you know, how we can make that work. We talked about the EV rally earlier, and that was a perfect example of seeing how it does work. There was a Mercedes-Benz truck, I think it was an e-Actros 600, I think it was called, and it was actually pulling a full 40-ton full trailer all around the EV rally, just to show, proving, you know, just using public network, that it can be done. And it was amazing to see it. And for me, that was a real eye opener that, you know, that it can be done now. You know, it does need to be tweaked by all means. You know, we do need to improve on certain things. There were certainly some challenges that they had, but it can be done. It is viable. And seeing that in real life and how, you know, they actually made it work. There were also other large commercial vehicles. There were large vans on there, large trucks. It was quite incredible. So we have got, you know, some infrastructure in play at the moment. We can make it work now. It just needs a little bit thought, a little bit more organisation. And I think moving forward, you know, as we're seeing more availability coming through, working with businesses on a kind of individual basis, for us, you know, thinking about building bespoke solutions, we're not tied into any particular, you know, hardware or software solution. You know, we're really about looking at a bespoke solution for customers and how we can build that around a customer's requirements, make that work. So working for us with those individual requirements, individual sites, and seeing how we can build it out has been a really interesting piece over the last few months, and something that we're going to see more and more of, because it's got to happen, right? We know it's got to happen. And it's really about supporting customers in kind of making that journey as smooth as possible.
Yeah. And I mean, your point about the larger vehicles needing more power, I mean, there's no escaping that. It is, some of these vehicles have got huge batteries. But if they do have a depot location, and if there is enough power at that depot and the vehicle is parked up overnight, then actually you don't need as much power as you might think if that vehicle's on charge for 10 hours overnight.
That's it. I think it's understanding, again, those individual business needs and what that looks like. And I think if you can understand that business need and you build to that need and that requirement, it isn't going to be a one solution fits all. It never is with EV charging. It's always about having the right infrastructure in the right locations, doing the right job. And that is no different for commercial vehicles, you know, larger vehicles. It's, again, just working with, you know, what's available and what the customer requires.
Yeah, great. And the final piece of the picture, Naomi, of course, is the driver, and the importance of making sure that they've got the tools around them, the education to be fully engaged in this and have confidence to get behind the wheel. What advice have you got for that process of engaging drivers?
I mean, it's so important to get drivers on really from day one. We've worked with a lot of large fleets, a lot of large commercial drivers who have been a little bit resistant to the process. You know, it is a real behaviour change, and that education piece, as you mentioned there, Kate, is absolutely key. We've conducted things like driver days. You know, we spent time with the drivers, you know, being able to answer questions, taken vehicles so that they feel a bit more comfortable with the vehicle and the benefits of the vehicle and what the charging infrastructure looks like and how to use that. I think, you know, bringing them on board as early as you can in that process, I think is one way of sort of dealing with that, being very open and honest and having support there to answer those questions and almost put their minds at ease a little bit. The other side of it for me is the driver experience. The driver experience is absolutely key. I think if they start having bad experiences with the infrastructure, it can put them off very, very quickly. So that driver experience, and how can you make the most of that, and how can you, you know, get the best out of it? Part of that is that education piece. So really understanding, you know, what they're looking to do, again, what they're looking to achieve, the different sort of networks that are out there. Another part of that might be utilising things like a single payment card. So they're not having to download lots of different apps. If they're using public infrastructure, they've got one single payment card that, you know, can access a lot of different ones. You know, these kind of things, and that whole support package, putting that in place, I think really helps ease that transition over.
Great. Well, I think we've pretty much covered everything, Naomi, and I can totally see how your experience on the rally kind of has supported so much of this journey that fleets are going on in terms of your understanding of that. It has been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for your insight, Naomi. And of course, thank you to Drax for joining GreenFleet Talks.
Oh, you too, Kate. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Naomi. That is about all we've got time for. Thank you for watching. Please tune in to GF365 again soon.